And we are live. Thank you, everyone, for attending our Connecting to Chicago series. My name is Corey Barnes, and I will be your host. I work out of the Office of Multicultural Student Success. And today, I have the privilege of interviewing Sam Ramos from the Art Institute of Chicago. Hi, Sam. How's it going today?
Hi, good. It's great to be here with you.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. Sam, tell us about yourself and how you got involved with the Art Institute of Chicago.
Sure. So my current role is Associate Director in Innovation and Creativity at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I had kind of a long and winding road to get there that I'll try to keep really concise. Initially, I grew up in Texas and I went to University of Texas when I finished high school, but I really hated it. And I really just wanted to write. So I actually dropped out of college, and then I went and worked in a bookstore for a few years there in Austin, and I did a bunch of writing and publishing, and I started to really get interested in working with people, and I realized that I really loved it and wanted to keep doing it, but I also wanted to really invest myself in the art world because I was so interested in art and being a creative person and things like that. So I came to Chicago kind of on a whim initially back in 2006, and I applied to go to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in art history and studio practice. It was the only school I applied to, and I happened to get in, so I decided to go ahead and go. And then I did that, and then I followed that up with a master's and MFA in writing. And by then realized that I really loved teaching. So was really interested in teaching at the college level, and I started teaching writing and studio art and arts administration and things like that. And then I did that for a few years after finishing my master's. I did it here in Chicago at a couple of colleges, including the School of the Art Institute. And then I went down to Austin for a couple more years. All this time I was continuing to write, mostly fiction, also a lot of essays and art criticism. And then I came back to Chicago when I got this role at the Art Institute of Chicago at the museum. I just saw a post online that said, this role allows you to work with college students. It lets you work with the museum. It lets you work with art. It lets you teach. And to me, that was just like everything I wanted to do. So I applied, and I happened to get hired. And then that's what landed me at the museum. And I started at the museum in 2017. So even though I started at the school back in 2006, and I spent a lot of time teaching and being a student there, the museum was a whole new world for me. And that started back in just about going on 3 years ago.
Oh, wow. What a journey. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of spoke to it, but when did you first decide that you wanted to work in this industry?
Well, yeah, I think I didn't realize, well, I would say I knew I wanted to be in the arts, probably starting when I was a kid. Like that's when I knew I wanted to write, when I was like 9 or 10 or so. I knew I wanted to be in a job and do work that would allow me to be as free as possible. And that to me meant being in the arts. So, these are some of the reasons that I dropped out of college initially so that I could write, so I could focus on creative writing, because I really wanted to be in work and, making a living doing things where I had as much freedom of choice and as much kind of agency as possible, and where I could just sort of think and imagine and work really creatively with other people. So I would say that I started to understand that a museum was a place that I could work back in 2000, probably back when I started my undergrad degree, my second time when I went to get my art history degree. I knew like art history was like a thing that happened in museums. I didn't know that my specific role or even that museum education was a thing back then, but I knew museums were a thing. So I would say that I started to become interested in museums as a place to work back when I was an undergrad, and then didn't really get serious about it, honestly, until I found this job opening. So just about 3 years ago, I started to really understand what it even means to work in a museum.
Okay, cool. What are some things about your experience that are distinctly Chicago?
I think that being at the Art Institute of Chicago is just, it's as sort of iconic and singular to Chicago as the L train is, or, as the lakefront. It's one of those places that if you see postcards or a movie about Chicago, they're more than likely to show a shot of museum or to mention it. It's just that iconic and that kind of much a part of the Chicago experience, the way that like the White Sox or the Cubs are, or the Bulls, So it's in that way, it's it's very Chicago, but also I think in the ways that the community works. We're very much and increasingly about critiquing the institution itself and thinking about what's our responsibility to Chicago, who are our partners that we need to be working with in Chicago. I know for example, part of my work means partnering and teaching with the Illinois courts and working with Illinois judges. And those people, of course, are very much a part of the Chicago and Illinois community. Same thing with the schools, the public schools we work with. The programming that we do is all like intended to be informed by and with the Chicago community. So in those ways, when you come and have an experience in Chicago, you may see a famous painting that only exists here, like American Gothic, for example, which is incredibly famous, about as famous as it gets. But you might also have a learning experience or an entertainment experience or a community experience that's very much informed by the spirit of Chicago.
Yeah, I like how you threaded everything. It definitely all comes together for sure.
Yeah, good.
How can DePaul students connect with your experience, either in a virtual environment or when the quarantine ends?
Yeah, well, we're definitely getting increasingly virtual, of course. The museum closed back in March and then reopened in July. And even though the museum is reopened, a lot of my work has been about making programs for the public, including in the galleries. Previously, we had artists doing performances, or we did gallery talks or lectures and things like that, and stuff for families, stuff for people of all ages. And now we've shifted all of that for now to be online. And eventually, we of course expect, we're going to be in the museum again. But for now, you can go to our museum website, which is Arctic. You can see at the bottom, arctic.edu. And you can find a lot of ways to connect with the collection virtually. You can do keyword searches and just find artwork and images that are fun that you could use on your own computers or when you're online or whatever, or you can just do research. And then a lot of our library materials are available online. You can see videos. All that. This is kind of interesting. When the museum closed, in the museum, we have a bunch of iPads out, so you can kind of scroll around and turn objects around digitally. We took all of that content and put it on the website. So if you go there, you can go and you can find an object and make it rotate 360 degrees and things like that. We're starting to get back into doing a lot of our actual kind of public live programming. An example of that is going to be something that's actually happening tomorrow night, Wednesday. You can see it right there at 5 o'clock. And the link is going to be shared in the chat, I think, that takes you to the page that describes the specifics of this program. But this is a program called Intersections Resistance that I'm co-facilitating with a curator named Felicia Mings. And we're going to be looking at an exhibition of art by an African artist named Malangatana, in addition to some other artwork in the museum. And we're going to be having a conversation. It's not a lecture. It's a participatory conversation with small groups, and also using the chat feature on Zoom and things like that to talk about the concept of resistance by looking at artwork. So if you want to think about protest and what it means to resist and power and look at artwork and to participate a little bit, this is that kind of program, and it's free. So the link to jump into that, I think, will be going live tomorrow. And so around 5 o'clock, you can go ahead and jump in if you want to and be a part of that program. So we're going to be increasingly doing programs like that, and lots of other kinds that will be on the website going forward.
Wow, that sounds like a great opportunity. I may have to check that out myself.
You should check it out, Corey.
Absolutely. Thank you. So what's a piece of advice you have for DePaul students that are first moving to Chicago?
I was thinking about that a little bit earlier, and I think that what I would say is that consider being patient. That's something that there's a lot of different ways, I think, in which patience can help you really enjoy Chicago. I think maybe the most glaring one is the winter. If you're not used to a prolonged winter that just goes on and on, like in Chicago, be patient, because eventually it will end, and April and May will roll around, and then it's going to be beautiful and sunny and green again. And if you're, going to take the train somewhere, and it seems like it's taken a while, just be patient and it'll show up and then it'll get you to where you need to go in actually a very convenient way. I think there's a lot of, that's kind of what I would say. If you're sometimes you just have to walk and, be patient that, appreciate that walk, appreciate that bike ride, and then it'll get you to where you need to go, and it'll be a great experience. So I think that just in a real broad way, that's what I would say. And also just kind of be open to what Chicago is, because it's got a very distinct character, and it's not going to change for anyone until you kind of make it your own and embrace it.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it, but what would you say you love about Chicago?
That's a great question. I've left Chicago twice. I came in 2006 originally. I lived in DC for a year, and then I also, as I mentioned earlier, I went back to Austin for a couple of years, and I've returned to Chicago twice. And that's because at this point, it's just really come to feel like home. I appreciate that it has so much going on all the time, but I think in general, it's very comfortable. Um, it depends on where you are. I think Chicago's got a lot of problems, but I think there's a lot of people who care about addressing those problems as well. So it's, I think, in some ways, a very kind of activist city. Is in addition to having all these issues, there are always people who care about addressing them. And so there's a lot of ways to get involved, regardless of what your interests are. There's some way for you to find them, to sort of pursue them here in this city. And so on top of that, I think this is just like an easy place to have fun whenever when you're feeling good and you can kind of get out in the world. It's a great place to build community. It's a great place to have great food. I think the lake is amazing and beautiful, and you have institutions like the Art Institute. You have sports. I mean, it's just anything I think that you're interested in, you can find it here. And I think that that's why I've continued to return.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely agree with everything you said. For students who may not know, what's the history of the Art Institute of Chicago?
Yeah, so the Art Institute of Chicago initially was, so this Art Institute of Chicago is part of the same institution as the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which if any of you are not aware, it's an art school. It's like a very multidisciplinary art school that's downtown right by the museum. And it's a 4-year school, and then they also have some different master's degrees that you can get. So the school came first around, I may get the date slightly wrong, but it was in the mid-1860s. Around 1866, the school was founded. And then some time passed, and they started to build this collection of artworks that initially was intended to inspire the artists at the school. And then, as it turned out, the museum, this collection of artwork, started to become its own thing. And so there were people who came in who just wanted to collect artwork for the museum. And then it just got bigger and bigger until in 1893, they worked with the the World's Columbian Exhibition, which happened in 1893, to build the building you see downtown now. So initially, that building was made in 1893 to be a part of the Columbian Exposition. And then they gave the building to the museum, so to the Art Institute. And that's when the museum sort of took off. It was in the late 1800s, and it just people could just continue to add collections, add more artworks to that building. The building itself has just continued to grow over time. It's kind of a massive complex at this point. It's approximately 1 million square feet at this point. And that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, we've continued to move forward. The last big addition to the museum was just in 2009. That was the modern wing, which was added. So it just continues to change. The galleries continue to change all the time. It's the work that's done there evolves constantly. So it's not like some museums you go to and it seems like you go there every 10 years and it's the same place. This museum is not like that. It's very forward thinking, and we want to kind of keep it evolving constantly. And I think that's been the spirit of the institution since it was founded.
Wow, real rich history. I didn't know it was that old.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. Are there any experiences or movements that have happened in this area that our student viewers would find interesting?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, well, I think a lot of different things, because it's such an iconic space. And when you're talking about an art museum that collects artwork, the term that's used to describe the collection is encyclopedic. It's aspirational. What it means is that presumably the collection has artwork from across the history of humanity and across regions and across eras. And it kind of represents everything that humanity can offer in terms of art making. So it's called encyclopedic. But what we've understood over time is that is very aspirational, and if not impossible. And so even despite the fact that it's kind of impossible to capture everything, we've captured a lot. So it's around like 300,000 objects representing all of human history. And so when you have a history of art in a place, you also have a history of humanity. So any movement, if it's the civil rights movement, if it's, abolition, if it's movements, spiritual movements happening across the world and across time, then those movements exist also in the collection. So in that sense, you can go there to learn really about almost any kind of movement, including the underrepresented. So for example, the museum art history has a kind of legacy of privileging white men as opposed to female or people of color artists. And so when you walk around the museum, sometimes you can see movements, for example, feminism, displayed or being emphasized just by their lack of presence. And that's something that we talk about all the time. So we're very I notice all the time, and I talk about all the time, the fact that we have a lot of artwork that represents women painted by men. And to me, that means that we can talk about the feminist movement in that space. The other thing that I'd mention is that I mentioned that the Art Institute was created, or the building was built in partnership with the World's Columbian Exposition. And it was called the Columbian Exposition because it was celebrating Christopher Columbus coming to America. The museum, therefore, kind of has some partnership with that legacy. And so that's we've been aware all of a sudden in the past few years, more so how problematic that is to be celebrated or part of this celebration around the kind of genocide of indigenous peoples here in the United States and America. And so the Art Institute has embraced the land acknowledgement, for one thing, acknowledging that the land the museum is on does not belong to the museum. It was indigenous land. So that's a movement and an awareness that we're becoming more aware of. And I guess the last thing I would say around that is that we are, myself and my work, and then many of my colleagues, we're quite aware of the things that are happening around Chicago, around Black Lives Matter, around the country. And that's another movement that we take very seriously and that we're trying to embed in our work across the institution. Of course, it's imperfect because it's a very large institution with a lot of systemic problems, but we very much embraced that fight. And so if that's something that you're interested in, you can also find that taking place at the museum. So I hope that answers the question. I was kind of rambling, but there's a lot of things I wanted to touch on there.
Oh, no, it definitely answers the question. And we actually have a question that came in from Olivia. And that question it's on the screen, but I'll read it. What was the museum's target audience before, and has it changed now working virtually?
That's a great question. A target audience is, well, because the museum is so vast and because our audiences are so numerous, I wouldn't want to say we necessarily ever had a specific target audience. I think that unintentionally we did, and this is part of some of the legacies I'm talking about, that our target audience has so often ended up being people of means who feel comfortable in art museums. And so we've done a lot of work trying to address that by working with partners across the community to try to bring other people into the museum to make them feel more comfortable in that space. And so when things went virtual, I think we just have been thinking about continuing that work. And we're trying to get very specific about who we work with. So for example, I mentioned earlier working with judges. I mean, if I'm working with Illinois judges, then in a sense, if I'm bringing them in and using the galleries and the artwork to help train them around implicit bias and power and race, then in a sense, those judges are my audience. But what's maybe more crucial to me is that the people and the communities they work with are an audience. When we work with families, it's not necessarily to say that we do something that's for all families. It may also be, try to be more kind of targeted than that. As you're using the word target audience. One thing that comes to mind is that with the shutdown and with people kind of being quarantined and not being able to be close, one person proposed that we do something, a workshop or something that would allow grandparents and their grandchildren to make artwork together online, something like that. So I think that's what we mean when I'm talking about target audience. We are always thinking about, who should we be reaching out to? What should we be making with them? And also, is the Art Institute, is it are we the people who should be going to them? Maybe we need to be partnering with somebody else. So I would say that with everything going virtual, our target audiences we've just become more conscious that we still have more work to do to go out there and make the museum available to everyone. And I love that it's online now, because it's easy for me to say, this program that we're doing tomorrow would initially have taken place in the museum. But in a city where people have always had a hard time traveling, especially people who don't have a lot of resources, and neighborhoods that don't have a lot of public transportation, it can be hard for them to get downtown. In this case, we just share a link and it's free and you can just do it. So, and that way we are expanding our audiences as well.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so we know Chicago's has an enormous and very diverse food scene. What's one thing about the Chicago food scene that local Chicagoans know that our students should also know?
I think that's a great question. I think that what I would say is that a lot of your kind of local hole-in-the-wall places are actually really good and really delicious. I mean, if you come from another city, you may not be aware that like that little hole in the wall that maybe doesn't look like it would be that great is actually amazing, especially if you're into like hot dogs or hamburgers or gyros and sub sandwiches and stuff like that. So I think what I would say is that you should get into some of those places when you can and pick up some food, because they may not be the most high profile places, but they're probably really good and affordable as well.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, so last question is, are there any additional programs or exhibits that students should look out for at the Art Institute of Chicago?
Yeah, right now, I mean, like I said, the museum is open, so you can come in and check these exhibitions out. We have multiple exhibitions up right now. There's the Malankatana exhibition I mentioned, which is focusing on this African artist who is really interested in social justice and liberation in the mid-60s and mid-70s. And then we have an El Greco exhibition, which is like big, bright paintings from, I guess, 16th century Spain. We have some artwork, a small exhibition focusing on the French Impressionist artist or post-Impressionist artist Louis-Lautrec. We have a design exhibition called Bauhaus Chicago. We have a Japanese print exhibition by an artist named Noda Tetsuya. We have some film video work that's up on display. So there's just always exhibitions happening. You can find them all on our website. These are just some of the things that are happening in the museum now. And these programs that I mentioned earlier and these exhibitions are just going to kind of keep coming, keep rolling out. So I think if you're just sort of looking for stuff to do, I think it's always a good website just to sort of check out and see, you know, what might you be able to do online or what might you be able to come and see in the museum itself.
Okay. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time and sharing so much. I learned so much about the Art Institute of Chicago, and I hope our students did as well. And have a good evening, and thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, take care.
Oh, wait, I see a note. There's one more question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, one more question.
I'll take it.
Are DePaul students still able to take advantage of the Art Institute for free? It's a great question.
That is a great question. Thank you. Yes, you can. You can come to the museum for free. I think that you still have to go in with your ID and go to the ticket counter. And then you should be able to get in for free the same way you always did.
Yes, very important. Thank you for catching that. But all right, goodbye for real this time. Thanks again.